I tweeted last night, I tried so hard to like Geostorm. So hard. Why? What do I care? What skin do I have in the game? Well, as a critic, it's tough sitting through a lot of really bad movies, particularly in a row. And I have to say, this was a lot better than Boo, too. But also, we've been having a rough couple of weeks, and I wanted to be able to deliver good news to you, right? But from the perspective just of the movie alone, I had 3 reasons why I was rooting for it. And the first is that I really like disaster movies, and I feel they get an unfair bad rap. For instance, my favorite disaster movie to date is 2012, directed by Mr. Disaster Movie himself, Roland Emmerich. And it got just a 39% on Rotten Tomatoes. And I'm sure you recall, people were making fun of this movie super hard. And there was a very clever spoof that came out where they recut the trailer as like a 70s disaster movie, and they said 2012, it's a disaster. And the spoof was so well done, you couldn't really get upset about it. Plus, the movie did so well at the box office. I feel deservedly so. So that 39% on Rotten Tomatoes, I feel is, I felt then and I still feel today, is like film snobbery at its worst. And I felt that it was happening again with Geostorm because of number 2, the trailer, which looked darn good. And it was a darn good high concept pitch. I would have greenlit this movie in the near future. We control the weather. And some people said, by the way, this movie came out at a horrible time. Who wants to see a movie about weather out of control with all the natural disasters that we've been having? Well, I say it seems like the movie's ripped from the headlines. And I think, in the opening when they were explaining the setup, I was like, yes, weather does seem to indeed be out of control. Wouldn't it be great if we could control it? And then someone weaponizes weather, which is always the case, So, and there's a line in the movie and they said, we solved a world problem. Basically, I'm paraphrasing because it's not as written as well in the movie, and they're like, and someone turned it into a gun, and you're like, oh, just like with atomic energy, it's always the way. So I thought this was a great idea. I was like, this is a great pitch. It's simple, it's clever, and no one's done it yet. So that's even better. And then number 3 is that as the movie began, it presented the world as I wish it would be. I was like when they had the flags of the nations of the world on the side of the space shuttle as it went to the International Space Station, and then you saw all the flags on the side of the space station, and then you saw all the people from different nations with their flags on the side of their uniforms working together. It just made me feel all warm and fuzzy inside. Because again, just like with Medea, I had some time to have deep thoughts because I wasn't really into the movie. And I was like, why can't we all just get along? Why do we have to constantly fight? I'm so tired of us having disdain for each other or worse, hatred. Why can't we all, why can't we have a good, it's competitive, of course, but why can't we respect our competitors? I wish that when we saw other countries, our reaction was, hey buddy, what's up? Let's bond over our similarities and appreciate our differences, right? And there's a perfect moment in the movie towards the end when Eugenio Derbez, such a small role, nobody really has a big role in this movie, but he has a particularly small one. But anyway, he of course is representing Mexico. And he does something really great, and he says, don't thank me. They're like, thanks, Hernandez. I believe that was his character's name. And he's like, don't thank me. And he points to the flag on the side of his uniform. He says, thank Mexico. And it was a moment that was so nice, and it was made even nicer by some people in the back of the theater who erupted in applause. And it was like, oh, how wonderful. How often, especially today, is, Mexico given that kind of respect, especially from the United States. And it was so nice to see a world where it was recognized that every country has something to offer. And I wrote it that way specifically in my notes because every country does have something to offer. And that's why it's important to emphasize recognizing it instead of because I'm sure that if I had said it just that every country has something to offer, people would be like, I wish that were true. It is true. Even countries that have problems or are on a different timeline than some of the other countries, there are unique individuals in every part of the world. And, you should recognize that, again, I can guarantee you that in every country on the face of the earth, there are some very special individuals at the very least. All right, so on that note, I have to say the optics on the bad guy at the beginning of the movie were super not cool. I was like, how did nobody in the studio be like, are you serious? It was a person from India, no less, but easily could be mistaken for someone who doesn't know their flags for someone of Middle Eastern descent. And so it's like, really? That's so cliche, and we're trying to move away from that, stereotype. And actually it's discovered toward the end of the movie that, sorry, slight spoiler, okay, don't worry, there's lots of other things for you to discover if you choose to see this movie. But it's like, oh, he wasn't a bad guy, he discovered something was wrong and he was trying to help everybody. And I was like, well, why'd you let me think for an hour and a half that it was just a cliche, bad optics situation? I mean, you did not make that clear. It seemed like they cut a lot from the movie, by the way. There are lines in the trailer that are not in the movie, and it's odd. I'm like, I think whatever you left on the cutting room floor, you need it, because this movie has serious problems. Now, speaking of optics, one of the things that's something else I liked about the movie, because it had a lot of good optics besides this poor individual. In addition to Derbez, I loved having Daniel Wu get a lot of screen time in a really cool scientist role. He was great. And they made Hong Kong look really nice. Abbie Cornish as a Secret Service agent, and Zazie Beetz as the hacker. I know there are a number of you, I see the comments, who whenever we talk about diversity are like, well, what about women of color? Women of color are at the bottom of the pack. And so I thought it was very nice. There was also a woman on the space station, I believe from Africa, but she had like 2 lines. But still, it was nice to see that representation here. And by the way, I've never seen Zazie Beetz act before, and I liked her a lot, so I'm feeling better about her domino in Deadpool. But while all their characters, and every character in the movie was just somewhat competent, it was crazy, all the actors did a really good job with the roles that they had, and they were believable and likable in them, right? So sometimes Abbie Cornish, you were like, you're a very ineffective Secret Service agent. But then you're like, but don't worry, you're an ineffective scientist, you're an ineffective space person, you're an ineffective politician. So, you're in the middle of the pack. Don't worry about it. I mean, sometimes she had to posture, and she did a good job. I believed she was a Secret Service agent, so that was cool. And everybody, it showed that you could, the cast is good. The cast is actually quite good, and they are a lot of what makes this movie watchable. So what's wrong with the movie? Well, the first half is just incredibly boring. I mean, I did enjoy seeing the future, where we go to space so often, there's basically a space airport in Florida. I thought that was really neat, although to use an entire space shuttle just for one person, Gerard Butler, to go up to the International Space Station, I guess there was an emergency, but I thought that was crazy. But I liked that. I liked seeing the way the space shuttles docked at the International Space Station. I liked seeing how they would take in satellites and jettison others replacements out. I thought the whole space station was really well realized. But the problem is that the first half of the movie, again, boring, and it plays like a network procedural show that's simply set in space. I mean, really, you're watching the movie, and I heard other people say this when I was leaving, because it's just such an obvious observation, and that there's hardly any storm in a movie called Geostorm. You saw every single action scene or disaster scene in the trailer. And now, of course, you couldn't have seen the whole scene, but I have to tell you, there's not much more in the actual movie, just a little bit. I mean, I did like the lightning storm at the end. That was pretty cool. And because I always think of comic books, I felt like turning to Fox and being like, so why aren't you doing that with Storm? It seemed pretty obvious to me, and it looks super cool. But while the first half of the film was boring, the second half was ridiculous. My audience started to laugh, and I was like, oh, this isn't looking good for the movie. And then finally, I started to laugh too. I mean, they had a counter come up in the space station saying 1.5 hours to Geostorm. And you're like, that's crazy. And then they were like, self-destruct initiated. And someone actually said, why do we have a self-destruct mechanism? Which I thought was a valid question, though, and they kind of answered it. Then they were like, we have to manually reboot the system. Someone has to stay behind. Basically every Michael Bay cliche that there is, but with none of his style. Yes, this movie will make you appreciate Michael Bay. Although I do appreciate Michael Bay. I don't need this movie to do that. Michael Bay is very good at what he does. Unfortunately, he just kind of put his reputation through the shredder with Transformers. If you watch earlier Michael Bay movies before that, he's very, very good. And Dean Devlin, who's making his directorial debut here, he's been a longtime producer of a lot of disaster movies to boot. He's trying to exist in a space somewhere between Michael Bay, every time they were in Florida, they had that, just dusk, right at sunset kind of a thing. I so expected Ben Affleck to waltz in, straight out of Armageddon or something. But then also with his former creative partner, Roland Emmerich. Yes, Dean Devlin produced Independence Day. But he fails miserably. I mean, he's not anywhere near the quality of either of those two directors. And also, this isn't making me feel very good about the new Terminator movie, because I think it's amazing that producer David Ellison, when you look at his track record, it's obvious that more times than not, he can't tell that he's making crap. I mean, I'm really surprised this stuff, the script gets, there are so many different places where you should be able to recognize this isn't working with the script on set in the editing room. So David Ellison, maybe he's not a movie fan, I don't know, but it's really ridiculous. I mean, occasionally he's had a few hit here and there, but I wouldn't trust his judgment at all. I mean, his father gave him a lot of money, and he clearly has a lot of Hollywood connections, probably because of said money, but it would really be worth it to use some of that money to hire somebody who has a better eye than him to look at these films before he greenlights them. I don't know how many chances I guess he has a bottomless well of money from his father, so he'll make movies forever. But we should be wary. Warner Brothers, speaking of money, is trying to get as much money as they can opening weekend. They didn't screen it for critics. They didn't even have, in most places, Thursday night showings because they didn't want to get any word to get out that the movie wasn't good, particularly during a weekday, right? If, everybody's just seeing it Friday, hopefully nobody really is online too much on the weekend and they go and see it, right? And also they have a lot of the showings in 3D. The theater that I went to, I didn't have a choice. So the time that I wanted to go, you could only see it in 3D. And I have to say the 3D, not worth the extra money. If you have a choice, totally go for 2D. But I will say that the 3D trailer they played in front of the movie for Pacific Rim Uprising was very impressive. That looked like it had really good 3D. So just a heads up on that one. So Geostorm is a great high concept pitch, and it has a great cast. And I was gonna maybe add it has great visual effects. And it does on the space station, but I have to say, with the disasters, the natural disasters on Earth, they looked awfully SimCity-like. Like when you were far away and you were seeing, little figures run for their lives, you were like, that's totally digital. It's always digital when you see it in a movie, but I was not buying it for a second here. But that high concept pitch and cast, totally wasted by Dean Devlin and David Ellison. And you can stream this eventually. It's nice to have on, maybe on in the background. It has a couple of moments that are nice. If you like space in the future, you can ooh and ah occasionally. You can cheer on your country of choice, but prepare to be bored and frustrated. However, even though it will be at the movie, you'll laugh a little bit too. All right, so that's my review of Geostorm. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about it down below. And as always, you can check out some more videos right now.